there was a pen.
Oh, sorry.
So after a day and a half of intense, very interesting discussions on stage, for sure in the breaks and in the evening as well, we're coming to the closing session. So we have invited a few representatives of different sectors to help us reflect on what we've heard today. We will by no means try to summarize this. For that, we have the Vienna Migration Conference report, which will come out early next year. But here, what we will do today is just to share some takeaways of what struck us, what did we hear, what are we thinking about right now, to help you also digest the 1.5 days of discussions before we wrap up and close this year's conference. So with me here on stage, I have Victoria Rietig from the German Council for Foreign Relations, Sophia Walsh from Fragomen, and Laura Dubois from the Financial Times. And together we'll try to just do a little bit of this reflection process. Please have your phones ready. We will have a poll still midway through. So those of you who want to participate, we still want to take the temperature on also what you think we should be thinking about moving forwards. So I'm going to start with Laura. What did you hear during the last day and a half that really struck you or that you're still thinking about? Or what are your specific takeaways?
Thank you very much. I think one thing that struck me particularly yesterday and also today in the panel we've just heard now was the positive tone on the EU's Asylum and Migration Pact. Obviously, following years of negotiations, overcoming deep divisions between the countries, it's a really big achievement that we have this compromise now between the member states, that Parliament also has found a compromise. But it seems to me that this compromise is still quite fragile. I'm based in Brussels, so I hear a lot from EU officials and from the member states, and to be honest, a lot of them are still kind of skeptical whether we can get there by the end of the year. One issue, for instance, is that Germany was still pushing for greater human rights safeguards, and there is, I think, a possibility that this could come up in negotiations still, that they might try and push this through the back door somehow. Then one of the flashpoint issues in terms of fault lines between Parliament and Member States, I think, is the issue of solidarity. So when do we relocate people between countries? The Member States don't want mandatory relocations, but the Parliament does. And I think that will be really hard to resolve, quite honestly. And then there is also the really fiery rhetoric some countries like Poland and Hungary have been using in the public sphere. There is an election coming up in Poland this weekend. So yeah, maybe to sum up, I think it's a really big success that there is this compromise after all these years. But I'm personally far from certain that they can find a compromise with Parliament. And yeah, with the danger of not finding a solution before the elections, the speakers just now have told us the stakes are very high. There is no plan B. I really hope that that will focus the minds of the politicians.
Yeah.
So we can get this over the line.
I do remember Minister Stenega saying if we have to stay, locked up until Christmas Eve, we will do so. So there seemed to be a big drive to get things done, and you could hear that also today on the stage. It's now or never. I don't think that it's never that black and white, but still, it's interesting to see where the temperature is right now. Victoria, what about you? What are your takeaways so far after a day and a half? What is sinking in?
Thanks. It's all still sinking in, as I presume for most of you, if I look into your faces, because I do see some tiredness, but also a lot of motivation. I'm very impressed that this is the closing session, and you're all still here. And I think that brings me to the very first point. I only have 4 minutes, but I do want to spend 20 seconds saying, wow, I commend you, really. This conference has been extremely well crafted, extremely well implemented, and I think the fact that we are all around here and that there's still this desire to keep the conversation going, I think is a testament to you and to the team effort that I've seen in the last few days and that I've been very impressed with. So, second, number 2. That was nice, but you stole my time, so... So I have 3.5 minutes left, and I do, since that is my role also, I do also want to say something critical. We've heard so much that it doesn't make sense to summarize, but I do want to point out a blind spot that I've seen crop up in quite a few sessions and that we haven't really addressed yet. I'm not going to talk about elephants. But if I think back of yesterday morning, the Commissioner Skinas said it. He said we have to say goodbye to our illusions. But there's one illusion that just kept cropping up, and we've heard it from Mr. Skinas, we've heard it from the Greek minister, we've heard it from the Swedish Minister for Migration, and that was that we should use carrots and sticks to reach our migration goals, and that would be, in fact, effective and desirable. Now, let me be clear. I very much agree that it is part of migration partnerships to use incentives, both positive and negative, so to use the carrots and sticks. That is both legitimate and it can, in fact, be useful. But our research has shown very clearly that quite often our carrots are not sweet enough and our sticks are not scary enough to really make a difference and to really get anywhere. Why is that the case? So we know that when we use incentives towards partner countries to get to migration goals that are unpalatable there, we know that it works, or it may work, towards countries that are dependent on Europe anyways, and where we have few other interests. But it is a lot less effective towards those countries that are more powerful, or where we have significant, especially security and geopolitical interests. So we do have a lot of powerful levers in our toolbox. We have, I think, the most powerful lever of visa-free access, but then again, we're not willing to take that into the negotiations with a lot of the countries that actually desire that. So yes, we have this tool, simply can't use it a whole lot. Also, the Swedish migration minister talked about the development lever, and that sounds always important because we know that the EU is such an important donor, but let's not forget that there are a lot of other countries out there that give out more money with fewer strings attached, and therefore are the more attractive partners. Now, my recommendation simply, and I think that brings me, if I look at my time, exactly where I need to be, is that, of course, we should keep using carrots and sticks and also talking about it, but we need to get away from this illusion that they will always bring the desired results. So we should use them, but we should use them a lot more smartly and a lot more selectively than we have in the past. And I think if we wanted to get there, we would need to have a little more conversations about partnerships. I do think that one of the things that I enjoyed most about this conference, apart from all the conversations that happened on stage and off stage, were actually the inputs from representatives of third countries here, and they sometimes touched on some of the very, very thorny issues, and I would love to see us going deeper into those and with a little more honesty and a little more reflection on our own limits, which are so great, and that is sometimes easy to forget when we sit in such a beautiful setting after such an impressive conference.
Thank you so much, Victoria. So I did hear also that it was the end of an age of naivete, so I think what you're saying actually matches that. So not being naive also in how we are approaching partnerships, and also how much getting to the sweeter carrots and the harder sticks will also require a lot of listening and a lot of trying to understand and staying in dialogue and communication, for sure. But definitely with a sense of reality check and in terms of the geopolitical realities of today. So, Sophia, I turn now to you. What have you heard during the last day and a half? That's something that particularly struck you or that you would like to share with us?
Sure, thank you. And firstly, I'd like to congratulate you again on a fantastic conference. We're very pleased to participate. From the business perspective, I think the immediate thing that struck us is the diversity of actors present in the conference and the different panels coming together to talk about all of these different topics within migration. A common theme that for me, from the business perspective, that really stood out is the demographic realities that we're facing in Europe, and needing to have diverse workforce from outside Europe to be able to combat this very real reality that is coming upon us. And we heard it from the Vice President Skinas, talking about his EU toolbox for member states for migration policy, be it with the EU Blue Card amendments that are forthcoming or revisions that may be coming in negotiations on the long-term residence directive to give non-EU nationals a future pathway to more permanent residence in Europe when they come over, to the creation of the talent pool, which is going to be the future interface for the recruitment of non-EU nationals. And we heard it also on the member state level from the Swedish and Greek ministers in terms of looking to attract the workforce for their own population continuity, where, of course, there's a lot of sort of gaps that remain. And then, of course, in the labour panels, in terms of creating new networks, which need to include this ecosystem of all of the diverse actors, of policymakers, of civil society, individuals involved in migration partnerships and the business, to ensure that when businesses set up and look to the talent pipeline, that everything is there ready for them to really kick off. A blind spot for me is something that we only really scratched the surface on, which is skills. There's still a traditional mindset in many member states in terms of equating skills with qualifications, and particularly as we turn our attention to the climate transition and the climate agenda, it will be non-traditional skill sets that we need. And so being able to leverage pathways or create pathways and consider the types of skills that we need, and perhaps working with, for instance, universities and higher education institutions in crafting curriculums, as we've seen some member states do and some companies, is going to be really crucial in terms of insourcing the right skills that we need into Europe.
Thank you. That is definitely an area that needs more dialogue still in terms of the diversity of stakeholders involved to make this really work, also to be able to work at scale, at the scale and the pace of change. This would be the time that I would like to ask you, the audience, what you think are the most pressing issues moving forward. So we've talked about migration now for a day and a half. You can select your up to 3, so top 3 most pressing migration issues right now that we need to address. Okay, so we have integration, interestingly, in the lead. So looking at, I think coming back to what we discussed in the very beginning of this conference, the role of communication and in general to make sure that our public is with us. So maintaining social cohesion, continuing to make sure that we invest in integration where we need to. And I think this is very much now the sentiment also of a European audience, I can imagine, given also recent developments and where societies really feel the tensions and the need for a long-term thinking, given that this is not any kind of short-term fix. But providing protection and recruiting the needed workers is also high on the agenda. That is something we have discussed extensively during the last day and a half. So these are the issues that you think we need to look at moving forward. But turning back to my panelists and starting with you, Sophia, what is it that you think that we need to keep in mind now until the Vienna Migration Conference 2024? What is it that we need to keep on the agenda?
Yeah, I think turning again to the diversity of actors present in this room right now and the panels that we've had over the last day and a half, a lot of the panels have been split down functional lines. So it would be interesting to see if we can bring together conversations and dialogues with these different actors that are all working towards a common goal. Sharing outcomes and lessons learned, so the good and the bad. And I think it was you actually, Victoria, a very astute question that you made yesterday in terms of we need data-driven insights as well. So if it didn't work, why and what's the data and in which countries? And this is true also for partnerships. So we are involved in several different types of partnerships in terms of migration and skills partnerships. Even our firm is, and I know that ICMPD has a great program with the MPF, but having more closer collaboration there to help to scale those initiatives. And again, several of the similar actors are involved, so to be able to avoid duplicative efforts. I think the role of migration and migration experts. So we heard from the Swedish minister and the VP Skines talking about how they are now involved in aid conversations and technical cooperation. We see this also from the business side that would be valuable in trade agreements and international agreements. Many are concluded without considering the migration consequences. If you look to the post-Brexit agreements or some of the free trade agreements that were, for instance, concluded with Canada, there are migration provisions but kind of fall flat because the operationalization wasn't really considered in practice. And then finally, digitization. I think we alluded to it in several panels, but there's really a piecemeal approach currently in EU member states in terms of digitization, where the readiness is very much a patchwork, yet the EU has a very strong digitization agenda with regards to its smart borders, ETIAS, the entry-exit system, and negotiations on the Schengen visa process, but the EU can't run ahead of the readiness of member states, so considering that as a whole would be very interesting also.
Thank you very much. That's very complementary also to what we said here today. Victoria, what do you think that we need to keep on discussing, or what do we need to keep in mind not to forget?
I think what we should be working on throughout the next year, and perhaps consider having a panel on that next year, is actually the public debate. And before you all start yawning, just consider this. In every single panel, at least one person, sometimes for a long time and sometimes just in a side sentence, said, we have a toxic and imbalanced debate. We have not talked about how we have perhaps also contributed to that, because some of us make our living talking about migration and we sometimes get things wrong, right? But we've also haven't spoken about how to change that, how to fix that, how to address that. And perhaps one of the reasons why we haven't bothered talking about this is because when pressed, we don't think it's that important after all. We've seen that in the polls, right? We've seen it just now where there was no issue debate to be clicked. And we've seen it in the poll on the very first day where public debate was part of the things you could select, but it was only in 5th place after climate change, after crises, after labor shortages. And I say that changing the debate should actually be a little higher on our agenda, not just, so for 2 reasons, not just because it influences all the rest of the other things, but because it actually is in our hands to do so. It is easier for us to change what we say and to change our debate in our societies more than all the external factors. So I think that is something that we should do more, and let us not just work where the biggest problems are, but also where we potentially have the biggest impact with what we're doing. So then how to do that? Just very, very easily, by putting ourselves out there and trying to bring that balance that we want to see in the debate and try and bring that ourselves. We try that at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Whether we manage to do it, it's up to you to decide. But secondly, by really targeting schools and universities and the way that migration is taught in our societies. Because that is how you influence a debate long term, and where I don't see a lot of thinking going in migration policy circles of how we could change actually how we talk about migration already kind of early on. And if we do this, here's now the big promise. So if we actually did that, I think we might get away from this big wall we've been running into here. Someone said the great sentence, things are strategically necessary but politically impossible. But what is politically impossible? The things we cannot say and convince people about. So if we actually worked on this more and had, some kind of a panel on the psychology, the debate around it, I think that would be useful. And I know that some people consider psychology a quite soft subject, but it has the power to give you hard tools to break through some of these walls that we keep running into. And I can say just from personal experience, having studied psychology once upon a time, among many other things I studied, it is not at all useful when seeking employment, but it is very useful when studying migration.
Thank you. We did, the Director General also in his opening remarks said exactly that, and it did come up several times. if we do not manage to convey and explain to the public why we do things and what we are doing also, then we're very vulnerable and we might fail. So it is an, if it's a chair with 4 legs, there's a leg then that is missing and we will be very wobbly. So thank you for bringing that up. I turn to you now, Laura.
Thank you.
What do you think we need to keep in mind?
Yes, so I think fundamentally one thing that could have been discussed more in this conference is the fact that migration and irregular migration are just facts of life, and Europe will have to face them in the long term. Commissioner Suma said this morning, she told us about the serious challenges that many African countries face. This is not just poverty and conflict and terrorism, but also bad governance, lack of opportunities, then there is climate change. And while some of these maybe might not fall under regular asylum criteria, I think they do warrant protection for some people. So I think 2 things follow on from this. One is that Europe should engage on a more level-headed footing with African countries and be more serious about their partnerships, which follows also on from what you said earlier, Victoria. It sounded like many African countries are not really happy with the conditions that Europe is offering, and I think Europe needs to be less Eurocentric in their offerings and in their demands when it comes to migration. And then, secondly, I think we need to somehow explain to the public that migration is just a part of Europe. It's not something that will go away with policy, and I also think it's not something that we can solve with some kind of innovative solution that some of our representatives have proposed. Because I think that just runs the risk of eroding more human rights, to be quite honest. So, I think we really need to take a hard look at the public discussion, how we talk about migration with other citizens, how politicians talk about migration. And I think this also includes, looking at why the debate is so toxic. This is racism, this is xenophobia. Maybe we need to talk about anti-racism and how to address these kind of social problems. I also found it interesting that inclusion came up in the poll, but was not very present in many discussions, so that could be something to look at maybe for the next conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your frank and also very constructive and forward-looking thoughts and contributions for us to start preparing the next conference, but also for us to continue to bring up in our discussions the platforms for debate and exchange that we provide. I hope that the Vienna Migration Conference this year has contributed to maintain that dialogue and that debate that we need to bring different stakeholders on stage and together at the margins of such a conference. And I hope that next year we'll see you all again. And now to close the conference, I'm very pleased to invite and hand over to ICMPD Director General Michael Spindelegger for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Malin, and thank you for the inspiring ideas you gave us. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, it is always my duty at the end of the conference to sum up and to close the agenda. And this is not easy. Having so many ideas in mind that we have heard during these 2 days, and I think they all have to be kept in our conference report, because there are wonderful ideas, there are so many suggestions that we have to think about and that we have to reflect. Yesterday we started the conference with the basic observations. We stated that our migration policy work perhaps is better than we all expect. We agreed that we still have a lot to achieve in view of growing challenges and opportunities, and we concluded, as also said now, that we have to communicate in a better way and to look forward how to explain what is done. Talking about Mr. Skinas, and I think he has given us a rich speech full of details that are interesting, but he reminded us of the so-called intellectual appeal of pessimism when we ask to discuss about migration. And I think this dominates the debate in Europe and makes it difficult to find common ground and joint solutions. In order to overcome this obstacle, he said, all sides must be receptive to each other, must be concrete on what they need, and clear on what they are willing to do for their partners. When they manage to accomplish all of this, they can be quite optimistic about progress in dialogue and delivery. I think we have to take that with us, to take this optimism when we are looking forward to find the right solutions. Against this backdrop, allow me to focus on a few aspects that we have heard yesterday and today. I think they represent the spirit of the conference, but also confirm that there is a reason for optimism, even in difficult and challenging times. First, we have learned that the concept of migration partnerships, that was a novel concept a few years ago, has developed in a common feature, and that it is widely used as a tool in international cooperation on migration. In this regard, we have heard that there is sufficient progress to upscale the existing partnership platforms into permanent institutions and structures that apply similar approaches in similar contexts and always involve the private sector and civil society. Second, we have discussed the need to build a global system of organized labor migration that works across all regions and serves the needs and interests of all sides involved. This number of 30 million jobs that cannot be filled on a global scale is really something that we have to think about. And this costs the world economy an amount of $1 trillion. Openings are there, but private sector representatives told us that they still face a lot of red tape when trying to recruit somebody from abroad. It may still take half a year or more to issue a visa or permit, even when all formal requirements are fulfilled. I think we can do better, and I think we can find ways to manage that. But we cannot do this work without enhancing the consent and support of our citizens. In this regard, we have heard that we need to find the concrete arguments to recalibrate this discourse. We have to be clearer on what a lack of legal and orderly migration might entail for our economies and welfare systems. And third, last but not least, I was reassuring to hear that there is still a clear commitment towards persons in need of international protection. Global displacement is one of the most rising issues, and it is our obligation to work towards better solutions for the most vulnerable groups among them. We must seek for new solutions, we know that, but we must never lose sight of our joint responsibility, and we must ensure that human compassion remains the central pillar of our protection policies. I don't want to take more time on that, but I want to assure you that none of the contributions made at this conference will be lost. As I said in the beginning, we plan, of course, a report about the conference. We will share it with you, and there you can read and see what has happened during these 2 days. All that is left for me is now to thank once more our hosts and supporters, the Organization for Refugee Systems, ORS, and the City of Vienna. I want to thank all our presenters, panelists, discussants for sharing their know-how and insights with us. And last but not least, I want also to thank my team of ICMPD, on the head, my deputy, Lukas Gerke, head of policy, Malin Frankenhaeuser, and all the team that was so much active during this conference. Thank you very much. You have made it a success. I wish you a good travel home. I wish you, if you stay in Vienna, of course, to look around in this wonderful city. I hope you enjoyed these 2 days. We have now some lunch prepared for you where we can discuss any other question. And of course, I hope that you will be present in Vienna 2024 when we are going to organize our next VMC next year. Thank you very much for attending us. Good luck for everything.